to bring in U.S. Army retired Major General Randy Manor. He was formerly the acting vice chair of the National Guard Bureau, and Scott Shuchart, a former senior ICE official in the Biden administration. Thank you for both of you for coming today. General, I mean, you called Trump's decision to have the National Guard involved inappropriate. Why?
First of all, the law enforcement is the first way that you go. They're trained, they're on the ground. The chief, as was already commented on, they know the communities. They know how to do this. The Guard, when there is the necessity to do it, then the city would then ask, local authorities would ask the governor for assistance, and it escalates in that manner. What has happened in this particular case is the president has unilaterally said, I'm going to federalize the National Guard for the 2,000 members and now 2,000 more, and I'm going to bypass the governor's wishes.
And what does federalizing it mean? It means they have the same authority as law enforcement or more limited powers?
No, they actually have more limited powers, except for the fact that the president is now having his desire of having uniformed people on the street, soldiers, armed in this situation. And that is an escalation, not a de-escalation of the situation. So I commend the chief in LA for what he is doing and trying to maintain the safety and order for his citizens.
But there is as many people are looking at it, they might be wondering, is there a line between when National Guard ought to be called and local law enforcement is overwhelmed, either by the number of people who were out or the reinforcement function of the National Guard? Because that's part of what these limited powers include, right? That they have a reinforcing effect, not a unilateral law enforcement cop effect.
That is exactly correct. And as was already mentioned, the law enforcement agencies as well as the National Guard, they work together all the time. It's not, you don't have time in crisis to develop relationships.
Right.
So the state and the local community leaders in the law enforcement, they have these relationships ongoing. So they know when to ask for help and to anticipate when are they going to need help. And that's why you have local community and then regional and then state. And right now that has all been bypassed by the president.
You know, I want to ask you, Scott, about this because there is this, as you mentioned, the learning curve in a crisis is going to be pretty steep, and it can't be. There's not the luxury of being able to do so. Governor Gavin Newsom has not requested the National Guard to be there. This is the first time, I think, in like over 6 decades now that a president has put in the National Guard without the request of a governor. Last time in LA was under George H.W. Bush during the Rodney King riots, and he had requested, with Pete Wilson, then governor of California, he requested at that point for him to be there. Talk to me, though, now about the decision of Governor Gavin Newsom to sue the administration. Prudent or no?
It seems like it was necessary in order to protect the state's sovereign claim. He is the commander-in-chief of that National Guard, and more to the point, he and his people are the people who are responsible for public safety.
We're watching right now, as you're speaking, the police line moving closer to the apparent civilians who are on the streets right now in Dallas. You're hearing an escalation of horns blowing or watching them walk closer and closer from our overhead view. You do see a group of people who are scattering around. There is a flag being flown. I believe that's a flag being thrown near the left side of your screen as well. But the police force is moving closer to this group of people at this hour in Dallas. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that he's asserting the state's sovereign role in keeping its people safe. Lawsuits have become the way that parts of our government speak to each other now. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but it's the mode we operate in now.
When you look at the trajectory of that litigation, though, obviously the priority right now is going to be to quell the unrest on the streets of today. But how does this play out in courts? What are the next steps? Who is overseeing this?
Well, it's in the Northern District of California. It'll go to a judge in the San Francisco District. Last I checked, it hadn't even been assigned to a judge yet, and the state hadn't asked for any emergency relief.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know that they really think that there's anything that can be done right now, and I think I don't want to characterize it as a political document. It's not a political lawsuit, but it's a lawsuit about explaining the different roles of the different parts of government. Is there really going to be a role for the judiciary in policing that, or is this part of a dialogue that we need to have between the state and the feds about who's going to do which piece of the law enforcement collaboration?
General, when you look at this and think about that collaboration, not just in terms of what's happening in the legal sphere, but when these two entities are working side by side, obviously the LAPD, I'm assuming, would take this more senior role here. Is that right?
That is correct. The National Guard is always in support, and that's very important to understand, that partnership. The National Guard, when it's under the governor's control, is supporting the local sheriff, supporting the local police chief in making things happen.
So how does that work in terms of the theory of too many chefs in the kitchen, where they have different viewpoints of how to stop a protest?
That's where the dilemma is. When you bring in federal troops under NORTHCOM, they report to the president.
NORTHCOM is what?
Oh, Northern Command. In other words, these troops are not reporting to the governor. They are reporting to the federal government. And when you don't have that local command and control in the same way, it could open the door for errors or mistakes, and it can be disconcerting.
I'm looking at apparently riot shields now having been raised in Dallas. You see that plastic that's being lifted in front of the face and body of the uniformed officers who are now in a line. They have on, look to be some sort of a riot gear of kind with the helmets on, as well as their shields up. They're standing across people who have different signs. I'm not able to read what they say in the moment in time, but this is the police line. They are now moving towards the people. As you can see right now, a quickened pace. They are gathering together, staying in one horizontal line as they're going forward and forward. You have some people who do have weapons on them, as the line appears to be wrapping around a park area where you've got people who are with signs saying "End ICE," who are looking back at the crowd of officers who are now right next to a flag, and people who appear to be remaining on the streets, including a flag involving Free Palestine. This is now in Dallas this morning. This evening, we're seeing it right now, Scott. I mean, obviously, what we're seeing is an escalation in terms of the approach of these officers towards civilians they would like to leave. This is no longer California. This is now Texas. Do you anticipate there being some sort of legal recourse there as well in terms of the governor acting?
It depends on what the governor decides to do, but what I see there are trained police doing trained police maneuvers. Those are not military maneuvers. Police have an entire range of escalation tactics. They have the tools for that. They're trained for that.
And they can as well, legally.
Well, yeah, consistent with the Constitution, right? They're bound by due process. The crowds are protected by the First Amendment, and police are trained about the right way to find the balance, and the courts can get involved if the balance isn't struck correctly. Our troops do a lot of valuable things, but this is not, I don't think, in the top 20 things that active duty military are trained to do. These are police activities.
Active duty military, I think about the Marines who might be deployed as well, or maybe doing so as we speak. These are military members, not necessarily in Dallas, but military members who are trained for overseas combat.
Combat operations,
this
not
is
domestic operations.
Not domestic. Now, describe why that distinction is so important in terms of the way this could play out.
I think if we go back in history to find out that story that's always told, that whenever the Marines were there supporting the local police and they said, "Cover me," and the Marines literally opened fire and destroyed the building. That word "cover me" does not mean the same thing for police as it does for the Marines. Cover me means suppress all possible fire in front of me. So the bottom line is we're going to find that active duty soldiers receive no training on working with Americans. It's not the same whatsoever about dealing in a combat situation.
What are the risks of having these Pentagon sending 700 Marines to LA now amid that unrest? I mean, obviously, if you had the National Guard takes orders from the federal government, obviously they have a commander-in-chief who might be at odds with the governor who is doing them.
Actually, the Marines and these activated National Guardsmen are going to be commanded by one commander that will report to the Northern Command military command process. The concern is that they may not be well connected. And young Marines, no offense, the average age of the Marines is much younger than a National Guardsman, and they're much more likely to follow exactly what they hear in terms of orders, of which they've received no training.
I see police now running right now. They appear to be running in an area. I do see some with some form of weapons. I'm not sure if these are lethal force weapons or those trying to quell an unrest in a non-lethal manner. They are heading towards an area. We have Jason Carroll. I want to go to Jason. Jason, what are you seeing? What's happening? Why are they running?
Yes.
Jason, talk to me.
Well, right now the officers are telling, so they're just saying move, move. It seems like they're trying to disperse this crowd.
Are they effective right now? I see the money. People were running at one point in time. I do hear some sounds in the background and screaming. Are people following their orders and commands?
Well, again, Laura, right now what we've been hearing, just the officers saying in command, move, move. And what we've seen is, let me try to give you some perspective, get my cameraman to turn around. You can see the crowd has started to disperse. They are moving in the direction down the street, away from the officers. You know, earlier I'd mentioned that tipping point when, you know, perhaps we get to the point where officers have said, well, they just have had enough. And it seems like this is that point. They are trying at this point to disperse the crowd. The crowd had started to thin out much more than what we saw earlier this evening. And so perhaps the officers here on the ground said this might be their opportunity to finally disperse those who were left. And that's what we're seeing. They're moving in a uniform line down the street. Now they've just given the command to hold their position, to hold the line. But again, Laura, not that many people who are now left. I'll have my photographer try to show those who are left, and you can see a sparse number of people here in the street at this point, compared to what we saw even just an hour ago, even probably just about 30 minutes ago, near the top of your show when we were talking. A lot less people who are out here, and officers continue to move. Now, perhaps what we'll see in the next 20 minutes or so, they'll decide to move again in formation down another block to try to thin out even more of those who are left. Laura?
Jason Carroll, please stay there. Again, keep our eyes and ears open for us. General Randy Manor, Scott Shuchart, thank you both so much. We have